We made this.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Ask Us About Loom, a podcast covering point-and-click adventure games, walking simulators, interactive fiction, etc., etc. And at some point, someone's going to give me a walkthrough to get me an actual tagline. But yes, we're here for another episode. Yeah, I'm surprised as well. I'm almost consistent. But again, I'm not here. I am not here alone. I'm here with Pat from all the way in is it Liechtenstein?
Liechtenstein, yes. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, I think you sent me a quite nice email saying that, I like adventure games. I'd love to talk on the podcast and stuff, and I'd like to talk about a certain game. And we'll get to that game in a bit. Even though anyone listening will probably read the game in the episode description, if anyone who's ever listened to podcasts. But yeah, I think in our initial conversations, you're talking just how much of a massive adventure game fan you are, and I just want to probably get down to the question: when did it all start?
No, it started very, very early. I had an uncle who had very early a C64, and he showed me how to use it. I could barely type and read and anything, but, adventure games always held that special thingy because they told a story. Most of the C64 games, they were just action, and even the role-playing games, they were mostly confined to dungeon crawling and stuff, except some exceptions, but adventures, they told stories, and that was what captured me.
Oh, okay. Do you remember what games on the C64? Because my first computer was a C64. I can't remember. I can't remember any graphic adventure games. I remember playing quite a few text adventures on it.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, do you remember some of the first games you played?
Well, I tried a couple of text adventures, but at that point I couldn't speak English at all. So what I needed was something graphical. And the first one I played was, I don't know if it's really considered an adventure game, but it's Alice in Wonderland. It's, you controlled Alice, and it had a verb interface, much later Lucasfilm did. So you could pick a couple of verbs, and I had a dictionary and I struggled through the game. I never finished Alice in Wonderland. It's still on my to-do list, but that was my first.
So how old were you then? Was this when? So were you playing this game in English then? Or?
Yeah. At that point, most games were in English. I think one of the very first games that was actually released in German was Murder on the Mississippi, I think. And then later came Maniac Mansion and Zack McCrack, and mostly adventure games that had a point-and-click interface, so they didn't need to translate the parser or anything.
Getting further and further. So you mentioned Maniac Mansion. So when did like the obsession kick in? Was it when you're slightly older? Was like when graphic adventures become the kind of old school golden age, or the quote unquote golden age where they are now? Do you remember when that kicked in?
I think one of the very first adventures that I actually finished was a Sierra game called The Black Cauldron, based on the Disney movie. Okay. And its advantage was you only need to look and do. You didn't have a parser. You could just press, I think, F1 for look and F2 for do something. Okay. And so it was vastly easier for me to play, and since it was graphical, I could kind of see what happened. I didn't need to translate everything, so that was probably the game that kindled the passion. Maybe Lucasfilm's Labyrinth as well.
Okay, and then you just got hooked and just yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned, I think you mentioned in emails that you got you collect games as well. So you got the physical, so you collect them physically. I try to get them physically now. I had a huge collection back when there was the C64 and the Amiga, but a lot of those were pirated copies. And only much later I started to rebuy everything. Now I've have quite a nice collection. Okay, so what? How big's the collection then, if you don't mind?
That's a good question. I need to count it again. I think it should be about around 700 adventures.
Wow, all physical.
all physical, not in mint condition or anything. Sometimes it just have the discs and the copy protection and nothing else. So there's not 700 big boxes there, sadly. But
wow.
Yeah, but there are new ones as well, of course, in that 700. And a couple of adventures I have twice or even 3 times because I bought different versions. But so it's kind of a cheat having to say it's 700.
So what's either your most expensive or your most or the game that you're quite proud of, whether it's rare or anything, or what took a while to get?
I would say it's the C64 version of Labyrinth, because that's pretty hard to find. And I have one that is, well, almost mint condition. And it's a beautiful cover. It shows the labyrinth, vastly different from what the movie poster looked. So it's a beautiful, and I think that's one of the most expensive I have. I started very early.
Oh, okay. So this has been like years and okay, cool.
Yeah. I'm a hoarder. I never sold anything, so I had an advantage there, and I saw it very early in the days when eBay still looked utterly atrocious. So.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there anything on your wish list that you haven't got that you wanted for years? Is there anything that's eluded you, or something that you've been wanting to get but you just haven't been able to find it?
That's a good question. I'm in a position where I have almost everything that I always wanted. And those adventures that I'm still missing are really rare ones that I didn't had an idea they actually existed.
Okay.
So this is, those adventures that I always wanted, I have them and I'm very happy about them. But there are lots of very obscure adventures out there that are quite a few that I still want to get it one day.
Any ones in particular, or?
Well, I would say mostly obscure ones that didn't come out on the PC or on the Amiga. On
random kind of one-off, like one-off weird things. Okay, yeah, I get you. But so, and. This probably leads us towards the game that we're picking and stuff, which is, do you want to introduce the game that we're talking about?
Yeah, because it's my second favorite King's Quest game. It's King's Quest 4.
So King's Quest 4, The Perils of Rosella. So why did you end up picking King's Quest 4? You mentioned it's your second favorite, so why this over your first?
Well, I thought maybe we would make a cliffhanger and I never revealed what the actual favorite is. But now I think everyone who played the King's Quest series might have a hunch which one it is. It's, of course, King's Quest 6.
Of course, yeah. I'm that's one of my I call it Mount Rushmore games. So there's a friend of mine who used to do a podcast stole the concept from another podcast where like you got a round. So the idea was supposed to be like a Mount Rushmore of Disney characters, and I think and I got like a Mount Rushmore of adventure games, and I think King's Quest 6 is one of them for me. It's one of the good ones, but I think in the emails I said that I was probably going to wait and try and work up to 6 at some point, but you also said that 4 is like your second favourite, and there's a lot to discuss on that. So, in general terms, what is it about 4 that makes you want to talk about it?
I think that 4 is a very important adventure in adventure history. It made a couple of really important jumps, both technically and how Sierra told their stories. And I think it's a very interesting game in terms of having a really great female protagonist. And I think it's a game that one can talk about because it has a lot of very great things about it, but also a couple of very bad things.
Oh yeah. All right, we're gonna get into a few of them a bit later on. But yeah. So I think before we continue, what we're gonna do. We're gonna have a quick brief. We're gonna have, as usual, have a brief spoiler-free chat about what the game is and what it's about. Purely so, if anyone who's listening to this kind of thinks, "Oh, I might want to have a go on that," we'll tell you when to stop listening so you can go and play it and then come back later on. However, as I'm about to talk about the plot, and I kind of joked with this pattern first, there's no way I cannot spoil the end of King's Quest 3, because the game follows, like, literally, I think King's Quest 4 starts seconds before King's Quest 3 ends. So yeah, if you really want to play King's Quest 3, you might want to stop now. And play King's Quest 3, then play King's Quest 4, and then come back, because I mean, it's only going to be a very mild spoiler, but it is like the last scene, and there's no way for me to talk about the plot of King's Quest 4 without spoiling the end of King's Quest 3. So this is your final warning. So for very, very briefly, the game is literally seconds after King's Quest 3 leaves off, when the main character of that game turns up in Daventry. I'm not going to get too much into who that person is, but basically what ends up is that the character of King Graham, who everyone is confused wasn't the star of number 3, is now at the very end of the game, throws his like infamous adventure cap to his children, and then suddenly has a massive heart attack. His daughter, Princess Rosella, is contacted by the magic mirror in the throne room by the good fairy Genesta from the faraway land of Tamir, who reveals that there's a piece of magic fruit that can cure Graham's illness. But due to kind of reasons, it's only a one-way trip, and she's got to make it fast. Rosella agrees, and then is transported to Tamir, and learns that Genesta has a talisman stolen from the evil witch. And I can never pronounce. I'm not 100% sure how this is pronounced. Is it Lalotte? Lalotte?
Yeah, or Lalotte. I always called it her Lalotte, but
like Charlotte
would be cool. Like Charlotte.
Like Charlotte Lalotte. I think Lalotte. Yeah, we'll go with Lalotte. So the evil fairy Lalotte has stolen Genesta's talisman, and without it, Genesta will die in 24 hours. And without the talisman, Rosella cannot return to the Kingdom of Daventry. So Rosella agrees to take a quest to find the talisman and the magic fruit. And as always, there is complications where Rosella gets picked up by Lalotte and is then sent on a quest to get three things that Lalotte wants, and etc. The game is released in 1988. The game has a text parser, so very similar to previous King's Quest games. So you control Rosella with the keyboard, and you interact with like verb commands, and as always, there are many dead ends. So many dead ends, and also quite a few ways to fall off stairs and cliffs, and etc. So. Yeah, so if you're familiar with the King's Quest, you know what you're expecting. So that's the gist of King's Quest 4, and this is going to be the point now where we're going to get completely spoilery and talk about the game a lot more in depth. And so if you want to play King's Quest 4, stop now and then come back later. And yeah, okay, if you carry on listening, it's your own fault. Okay, so we're now at King's Quest 4. So I can't remember the last time I played this properly. I think this was like years and years ago, when I got it from the Roberta Williams anthology. So anyone who listened to my chat with Sorsha from the Adventure Games podcast about the Colonel's Bequest, when I talked about the Roberta Williams anthology, and a part of that was pretty much the first seven King's Quest games, including this one. And I remember playing that, and in the lead up to this, I never finished it in the lead up to this. I only managed to play a fan kind of tweak with where they converted it to a point and click parser with a verb thing, so you didn't have to use text commands, which is a lot of fun. Except that the path, when you clicked on a path, it just walked over any hazards. So if you was walking across the cliffs on the beach with the mouse pointer, you'd fall down a crack. So yeah, but we're going to be talking about the original version of that. So, Pat, what kind of things jump out to you about this game that make you love it so much?
Well, first, the introduction sequence.
Mm-hmm.
It's really beautifully made, and it just grabs you and pulls you into the game, especially because, King's Quest 4 was one of the very first computer games, and probably the first AAA title, or what was a AAA title back then, that used sound cards.
Mm-hmm.
And on PC, especially with the MT32 or compatible devices, it sounded amazing. And the whole musical theme there, the pictures with it, I mean, the introduction sequence, I think that takes about, could it be 5, 6, 7 minutes in introduction sequence where you just watched the events unfold. And yeah, I was hooked. I was grabbed. And then you land in Tamir, which is a beautiful, a beautiful country. And in typical King's Quest fashion, you could pretty much explore Tamir freely and start with a couple of puzzles wherever you want to start. So it feels very open at the beginning and very, very friendly, very beautiful, lush landscapes, a nice little river meandering through the country and stuff. It feels like something that you want to save, actually.
Yeah. A bit of warning to anyone, a bit of warning to listeners who probably aren't interested in technical stuff. I might delve a bit into more of the technical aspects of engines and stuff like that. But this was released in 1988, and I'm slightly going to go back again to the Colonel's Bequest episode, which was released a year later, and. A year later, when my chat with Sorsha was about talking about how beautiful the game looked, and that was on 16 colours with the SCI interface. And I think they kind of learned a lot with the SCI interface with King's Quest 4. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm on about with the SCI interface, the SCI stands for the I think it's the Sierra
Creative
Interpreter, which was a new engine that they made based on the AGI, which I think, you might tell me that one, I can't remember what it stands for.
I think it was the adventure game interface, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And big difference with that was that, there was support for external sound cards. The way that the games were programmed was that SEO was object orientated and AGI was procedural. To try and bore too many people, what basically that means is procedural languages, you pretty much have everything in one massive, big, long piece of code. So, yeah, imagine you've got like a massive scroll. So, like in Daventry, you've got a massive scroll, and everything is on one long piece of code, and the game jumps up and down through them. With the object orientated programming, and I'm flashing back to university as I say this, but what you've got is, imagine kind of mini scrolls that reference each other, so you can kind of like reference other files or other pieces of code in one main code, and you can and it's a lot less linear than a procedure, and it's a lot faster. There's a lot more you can do. For example, I think this is. And one of the best examples of the difference is that King's Quest 4 is one of the few games, might be the only one, that was released on both AGI and SCI. AGI version is apparently very, very rare. But when you compare the two, the differences are striking. The sound is just on the onboard sound of the motherboard in King's Quest 4 on the AGI version, whereas the sound card enhanced for on the SCI, like you can hear that there. One of the better visuals as well is that they've got the same amount of colours, which I think is still 16, but the resolution goes from I think 200 by 120 to 320 by 200, and what that gives the SCI interface, and you see this. And this is very similar to what I was talking to Socia about with the Colonel's Bequest, is they've got a lot more ability to do what's called dithering, where you take pixels, but you mix different colours to try and create shading, and the difference in the depth makes it look stunning. And in comparison to the Burnout Cosmic Quest, where it's set dark and very atmospheric, here it's very live, very vibrant, but it feels lived in. And again, it's amazing what Sierra have done with just 16 colours and a lot of dithering.
Yeah.
So
the dithering was their great thing. That was something that LucasArts started doing later, I think, with Bloom. But Sierra started it with their dithering techniques, and they showed how good it looked, especially on a CRT monitor back then, where there was sort of color bleeding going on. So there was even more a single color than just dithered landscapes. So
so like the pixels weren't as clearly defined, so it looked. There's kind of like a blurry feel to it, and it looked really, really nice. But yeah, so we get into this kind of new kind of world and everything with this story. What I found quite interesting was that apparently in the development and release was that there were and this is from the kind of mid to late 80s, of the rumours of the plot where they was going to kill off King Graham, and but apparently this leaked, and in what could only be kind of like foreshadowing of some of the more darker sides of social media, apparently there was like people writing into Sierra going, "Don't kill King Graham, don't kill King Graham," which, I mean, like this was before the internet, I know.
Yeah, they had to write letters.
Yeah, like don't kill King Graham and stuff, and I was like, wow, I can't believe there was fan backlash back then. But in the notes for the King's Quest Collection series, she talks about this. Before King's Quest 4 was released, word leaked out that Graham would have had a heart attack and might die. Fans were upset enough to write in asking to save Graham. I wanted King's Quest 4 to have some pressure applied to you. A timed game, taking place over a 24-hour period, so when you roam around during the day and eventually turns into night. I don't remember any other games using the same scenes at night. It looked creepy. And Rosella continued, Roberta Williams, who designer of the game, I think we've completely forgot to mention at this point, said, "I like the heroine, Rosella. I guess that's because she's a part of me that's coming out. I really identify with her. Sometimes she's delicate, but she's strong and she knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to do what she has to do. She's courageous, and it was fun to me to do a female character." So, so it's a lot of kind of new, as you alluded to before, there's a lot of new things happening with this, and some things that, like Roberta Williams and Sierra were doing with their games, like for example, the day and night aspect. Which added to things as well. Again, I think I don't think she wasn't the first female protagonist in a game. No. I think she was one of the first female protagonists in an adventure game anyway. And I think me and Sorsha had that conversation when we were talking about Laura Bow. When did you first play King's Quest 4? Was it? Can you remember?
It must have been either 88 or 89, very early on.
So you was around for the launch?
Yeah, basically. I still had an Amiga back then, so I played it on the Amiga first. So I had great sound, not quite as good as the MT32, but pretty great, except the Amiga version was sort of a little bit of a lazy port. It didn't have it did have the SCI graphics basically, but with a little less detail and a little less animation going on. And I remember that the sound or the music was a little bit too slow, but it did have sound effects like the waves or the wind and the birds chirping, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that like the sound effects weren't in the PC version, but there was in a couple of the ports and stuff. I didn't realise that they had that. But so was you waiting for King's Quest 4, or did you play the original one, the other ones first? So
I played 2 and 3 first. I hadn't played King's Quest 1 at that point. I played King's Quest 1 later when there was the SCI re-release of King's Quest 1. So I never played the original King's Quest 1 at that point. But I had already played 2 and 3, and I was looking forward. little bit because of the cliffhanger of King's Quest 3.
Okay. So, did you know anything did you know anything about it coming leading up to it? Was you kind of surprised, intrigued that there was change in the lead character again? Because I think, from what I gathered, there was a massive shock that King's Quest 3 didn't have Graham in it. But so do you remember anything like? Do you remember your thoughts or feelings when it wasn't Graham again, or?
Well, actually, since I only played Graham once in King's Quest 2, and there was that other guy, Gwydion, in King's Quest 3, and I was a little bit confused.
I wonder who he turns out to be. Anyway. Yeah.
Now, the thing is, I actually thought, because I had played the Black Cauldron, I was kind of confused why Gwydion would be, which is a character from the Book of 3, which the Black Cauldron is based on. I thought, why is there Gwydion?
So you thought the Black Cauldron was related to King's Quest originally then? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was very young, just to excuse myself here. And so I wasn't actually surprised that I played yet another person. I was a little bit surprised to play a woman because I was a young boy. And at that point, it felt easier to get into a boy, playing another boy. But it actually changed with King's Quest 4. And nowadays I prefer to play women, female characters.
Yeah, and I think it's quite. There's a nice kind of fun kind of like you're following another character, another part of the Daventry royal family, and pretty much very much influenced by her father in terms of like going to try and adventures and stuff, and so. So as Rosella goes into the story, so let's talk a bit about the plot. So Rosella then comes in contact with the Lot, who tells her to go on a quest for these three things, which admittedly don't actually have any basis on the plot whatsoever. But
no, they're complete MacGuffins.
Yeah. I think if the company that redid 1, 2, and 3 ever redid 4, they would definitely be in the plot. Considering what they did with Romancing the Throne, but that's a completely different story. Admittedly, so you're going on this plot for no real reason whatsoever, and then eventually, Rosella ends up getting into conflict with the Lot, and in the process of trying to retrieve his talisman. And it ends with Rosella getting the talisman. You can forget to get the fruit.
You can actually do that.
Because that feels like an optional side quest that you don't have to do. Or if you get the fruit, you can even eat it. Let you eat it.
You can do that. The game lets you do that.
He goes like, here, should I let my dad die? Crunch. And then basically leads, and then you can end up to, and then there's a point where in order to defeat the Lot, you shoot her with Cupid's arrow, and not realizing Rosella accidentally committing manslaughter, not realizing that love will kill a lot. But the story itself. I think particularly at this point, I think the stories are slightly getting more complex. But I think the previous number 3, I think was a much more complex story in terms of what's happening and what you have to do and stuff. And I think 4 has that. It's still quite basic in terms of what. Eventually, I think in 5 and 6, where the story feels a lot more in depth. But I think particularly as the King's Quest series is going, we're at a point where the stories are coming a lot more kind of refined and a lot more interesting. But there's more of a narrative rather than previous games. In number 1, a lot of the story was told in the manual, and you just want to get stuff. Number 2, you're going, there's a princess in a tower. Go and rescue her. And here we get a lot more kind of depth to the story. What's your take on the actual story? Do you like most of the plot?
Well, the thing is about King's Quest 4, I don't think that King's Quest is a sort of a fantasy game. It's a fairy tale game. And I don't know where the name The Perils of Rosella comes from. I always thought it might be from The Perils of Pauline, which was an episodic format of an episodic silent movie where always there were cliffhangers and stuff. And my take is that the more episodic nature of King's Quest IV was fully intended, so you could just, one peril at a time and just get Rosella through all these bad things that happened to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought that was brilliant because Rosella is a princess. I mean, she was tied to a tree and a three-headed dragon was once attacking her. Yes, yeah. But other than that, she was a princess all her life. It's not like Alexander, who grew up poor and at the bottom. Rosella was always a princess. And now she's at a point where she kind of experiences to be low in status. She is disguised as a peasant girl. She has to cook and clean and do nasty things for an evil witch. And a lot of bad things happened to her. And I thought that was that which captured me. It's the length she would go to save her father. Even I know she probably knows she doesn't have another chance. There is no other chance coming to save her father. And she hesitates only very, very briefly and then accepts not knowing what actually awaits her because Janessa cannot tell it to her. It's and I like that. It feels like a strong character.
Yeah, what I quite like as well with the story of this is that I think with this and I think with an idea that was influenced in the previous game was there's a pressure, there's a time, there's a very uneased pressure and stuff, and it's not as so I think the time limit which actually is actually in real time, so it's 24 hours of actual time in the game, but the internal clock apparently can get reset on every time you load or something, and so like if you're actually playing for 12 hours, the night automatically starts kicking in. Whereas I think if you've been playing it for a certain point, there's a point in the story where night gets, there's like a time jumping night happens there. But and so you got this time limit saying, oh, you got 24 hours, else you're not going to be able to get home, you're not going to be able to save King Graham. I mean, I think that kind of pressure was also experimented in with King's Quest 3 with the basic PTSD of Manaman threatening to come in and kill you every single time, and just like you being too scared to do something. I think there's a lot more kind of freedom to explore here, but there's still that kind of added pressure and that kind of peril, that quote unquote peril through that. And I think it's quite nice for the character and the narrative to say, okay, we've still got a time limit. I think the game doesn't. I don't think the game doesn't do that much of a good job of reminding you that time limit's there.
Yeah.
So I think you say, oh, you got 24 hours, and I don't think the fact that you've got that actual time limit is added on to that, isn't more pronounced to the player to add that kind of amped up anyway. But yeah, I think the kind of like trying to have to do these things. There's I think one point where she has to get a unicorn, and I think at one point the unicorn's quite friendly to you, but I think there's a certain point where it stops being friendly to you once it realises what you're trying to do and stuff. Also, I think the reaction that people have to her when she's just wearing like peasant clothes. I think at the very start, I think Janessa transforms her kind of like a princess gown into like rags more or less, and you then interact with Edgar, which I completely forgot. I completely forgot Edgar was in this because I remember him from 7. Spoilers. Spoilers. He turns up again. I remember from 7 because I remember the voice. I can remember the voice acting of Edgar far too much. He's in this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point mentioning King's Quest 7. And I think personally, I am very sad what they did with Rosella in King's Quest VII. That's one of the reasons why I absolutely don't like it. It's my, I think it's the second worst King's Quest game. Only 8 is even worse. But I was so disappointed what they did with Rosella in King's Quest VII. Everything that they did great in 4 was destroyed, basically.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of interesting kind of decisions they do with this as well is that there's a kind of it's like Edgar like doesn't really care about Rosella until like it's like, and it's only like she's royalty, all right, and then he suddenly gets a lot more interested as soon as he finds out that she's a princess, and then immediately kind of proposes marriage. But I think Rosella actually just says no. I got to go home.
Which is cool.
Yeah, which is cool. Go, slow your roll, mate. Slow your roll, mate. I've got a dad to save, and trust me, he's a lot more powerful than you are, mate.
Now, any lesser game would have done that differently.
Yeah, it probably would have amped up the kind of the romantic aspects of it. I think which I think 6 kind of delves into that a bit more, but so like you got kind of a character who's like there to do one thing and not kind of like get distracted by a romantic subplot, and you've got just like her trying to do basically just to save her dad and like basically also try and save a kingdom at the same time, which she ends up ending to do because basically she's a father's daughter. Because I'm pretty sure that's the same thing that Graham would have done, where Graham like, I need to do quests, and then finds out that something's also happening, and the Daventry royal family will probably just not just like, I've got this magic fruit and pop off. They will actually have to go and help stop the evil witch or the evil fairy as opposed to that. But and that's kind of like the main kind of just story as well. But there's a couple of interesting kind of like things that they kind of do, which fall into kind of the kind of things that we kind of like and dislike King's Quest 4. Or the annoyances, the annoyances that give the serious character, like the many ways to die and the kind of the world that comes in. So, I mean, how many times did you accidentally get caught by the trees?
Yeah, I mean, it occasionally happens if you, get in from the north and Rosella starts a little bit too much to the right of the screen, and then she's gone.
There's these very kind of very creepy looking trees that are obviously there, and they've obviously got hands. And their eyes are moving and stuff, and you're thinking, oh, okay, what are these? And then if you move too close, they'll just grab you. And then it's like, well, you shouldn't have gone too close, Rosella.
It's always Roberta Williams personally advises you, next time, be more careful.
You got those kind of things. There's the kind of like moments where you'll walk into a screen and there's an ogre or zombies that chase you, which caught me a few times.
Or the shark when swimming.
Yeah, the shark swimming and stuff. I think because of the Colossal Cave remake that Roberta Williams and her husband Ken Williams, who was the president and founder of Sierra, are doing. They've been doing quite a few like chats and kind of talks and stuff. And Roberta's kind of design philosophy for that was to extend the life of the game. Was to extend the life of the game and stuff. And to be fair, it did.
It did. No, she was always a fan of, being able to actually lose the game. And I think I kind of agree there. Now, she personally said the one thing that she liked about Colossal Cave was that she was thinking about puzzles whenever she was not playing. And she wanted to make a game hard so that the people would have the same feeling of thinking about puzzles when not playing, and then when finally getting it, that that euphoria you get when you finally solve a puzzle. And I mean, that's commendable. I think she went a little too far with a couple of things, but generally, I do agree. I love it when you can lose an adventure game, when you can die, when you feel for your character. I mean, the grisly deaths that Rosella potentially experiences, it just makes it so much more hands-on that she is in peril. And I love that. I love that in all the Sierra games, especially because, I mean, it's not so much in King's Quest 4, but in a lot of other Sierra games, that there is an art form of having deaths.
Oh, yeah.
And the funny responses you get.
Oh, yeah. I think, there's a lot more tongue-in-cheek. I mean, tongue-in-cheek for the majority of them and stuff. I still think that, I still have kind of nightmares of Manaman just of appearing and saying like empty my chamber pot and like basically making me do jumping jacks in the middle of the house and stuff. But I don't know. I think I don't know. I quite like the idea of like the kind of like the kind of death will be, or the exploration bit of it. It's I think it's the bit I kind of, the kind of LucasArts fanboy within was kind of is the kind of like spending ages doing stuff, forgetting to save, and then suddenly walking off a cliff and going, damn it, I've got to do half an hour's worth of gameplay again. But I think the kind of the frustration aspect of it, there's a bit of fun, particularly when you first find the kind of deaths and stuff. And I think I think later games when they start, I think it's when Josh Mandel starts writing the death stuff of other games and stuff, where it makes it a lot more goes like, well, you should have watched where you're going, Graham. Particularly in the King's Quest 1 remake, especially, like, it's like the game mocks you, the kind of like takes the piss out of you, right? Like, constantly mocks you for dying and stuff. I'm a lot more warm to it when I was younger. Anyway, it's the stairs it's the climbing of stairs and the falling off that I think is the bit that really annoys me rather than the deaths. So I don't mind kind of like realizing that going too close to a tree kills you, because that's part of the puzzle. You have to work out how to do that. I think it's still the like you press up too much and you misjudge and you have to do a really funky kind of dance with the left and the right, the up and the left key to kind of not fall off, particularly on a curved stuff. That's the bit of the King's Quest games that perhaps stops them from perhaps being a slightly higher than other series for me. But I think that's probably why I quite like number 6. You don't have that much.
Yeah, I mean, in 5 and 6, what you have is the mouse interface, and you can pretty much choose where you go. And I mean, King's Quest 4 does have mouse control, and it works very well. It works pretty much like you told earlier, that the character will walk in a straight line where you click, but that straight line is not limited to the 8 directions of the keyboard. So you can much more finely tune where you go. So it takes a lot away. The problem is that you have to take the hands away from the keyboard, which doesn't feel natural, because I mean, you need the hands to type, and so you're always switching from keyboard mouse whenever you go. And at one point you just walk with the keyboard because it feels more natural. And this is why it works much better in King's Quest 5 and 6, because you're always just grabbing the mouse. But this is certainly something that can be very annoying. And if you remember, I started with the Amiga version of King's Quest 4. And the problem there was whenever you save the game, there was a lot of disk swapping going on. Yeah. And then you had to swap to a safe disk, saving on there and getting back to the game disk. And saving took, maybe 30 seconds or something. But yeah, every time in a modern context, it's not that bad. You can save in a quarter of a second. There's basically no time. And if you play it with ScumVM, there's an autosave feature that saves every 5 minutes or something. So you never lose a lot. But even if you had to replay a sizable chunk of the game itself isn't that long, even when it feels so, because you were trying stuff and testing puzzles and stuff. But you rarely lose a lot of time. The whole game takes about 1.5, maybe 2 hours if you know what you're doing. So
when speedrunning.
Yeah, I think this is not even speedrunning. I think you can. I would have to look at it. I think you can do it in about 2 hours. I think without speedrunning. Yeah, it's not leisurely playing it, but it's possible. And so when you load the game, it's often just a little bit you have to redo.
Yeah, I think when you talk about kind of the modern game aspect as well, bit more context. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been I've forgotten the name. Tom from Tall Story Games, who just recently created Lucid Dreaming. He appeared. I think he appeared on the podcast. The Adventure Game Hotspot podcast, and I think it was him. If it's somebody else, I apologise. I think it was him that talks about it. But he said it took him a year to complete King's Quest IV when he played it as a child. But what happened is you was playing it, and then you'd go and talk to your friends and like say, did you do this? Did you do this? Did this? And you go back and you try and play it. And because of the way the game is, it took a year to complete because you had no walkthroughs, you had no into it and stuff. And then you got all the avoiding of death and everything. Something that you don't get in kind of games now is that because it's a lot more kind of immediate or quicker, and you can find walkthroughs instantaneously on the internet. I think there's on one hand you kind of lose that kind of social element to it. On the other, particularly as an adult in my late 30s, and you don't have time to spend a year on stuff. I'm kind of see how that kind of negative, but then you can kind of see how that kind of be a drain. But then you kind of, I think the game is very much designed to be a longer term thing, particularly for young people. When you like back in the day, like you only had pocket money to spend, and buy one game every God knows how long, a month or even less than that. You had to kind of get the most out of your game and stuff. So you had that kind of element of like this discovery, and the fact that you can constantly die, meaning the game's more difficult. So you have that kind of value for money. Is that, if that's the right one, or you get the most time out of the game as much as possible. Anyway, so but I mean, how long did it take you to complete it when you first played it?
Oh, that's probably a question I cannot answer anymore. I feel like it was the whole summer. But as you told, there's a lot of talking with others, having friends over, thinking, what could you do? What might work? And there was one puzzle in particular that took me a long time, and that was the deserted island. And I was so sure that there must be something on that deserted island except the pelican that would give you the means to get away from there. And it took a long, long time until I found the bridle that you need for the unicorn. And I think it was my mother who actually suggested, did you search the ground in the boat? And I was like, what do you mean? I looked at the floor. She doesn't see anything. Yep. Did you look at the floor in there in the boat? And I try that and look floor and there's something glittering around. Say, what? My mother has saved me.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, if I remember from that, the game doesn't kind of direct you to look in the actual. You have to kind of guess. Yeah, which I think. Again, modern games or games that, or perhaps if it was created about 5 years later, you would have some dialogue where like they'll hint to the player saying, "Oh, maybe I could look in the thing." Yeah. But I think if I remember rightly, you have to kind of go behind the boat to look in, walk around it.
Yeah, I think so.
So like you literally have to look in. You have to look at something that you can't see, or wouldn't have thought. Say you just look boat and. Yeah, you just like look boat and it's like, oh, it's a boat, but you don't actually look in the floor of the boat and stuff. There's a couple of instances I think where like a couple of like infamous instances of slightly more annoyances of the game as well. One of the more famous ones is I think when you're swimming, you get swallowed by a whale.
Yeah,
and in order to escape, I think you have to basically reach up the like either not the tonsils. What's it called? It's not tonsils. What's it called?
I'm sorry.
The dangly bit in the back of your throat. Yeah. You basically have to tickle that with a feather to escape, but you have to climb the tongue. And
you have to time that.
And you look online, and infamously people keep going on about that flipping tongue, because what I think I don't think it's not a random path, but there's no. But what happens is you have to be pretty much precise. You have to climb in this tongue. Yeah. If you go off the path, it gets too slippy, and Rosella falls back onto the tongue again, into the throat again. And I think I remember I have memories of actually. I must have done it because I'm pretty sure I've gotten further than that, but this was like years and years ago. But I do remember constantly getting annoyed when you try and work out the path and you keep falling.
Yeah, and there is always that horrible sound.
Yeah.
How many times? And the problem is there's also time limit because there are noxious gases in there, and Rosella will eventually die. So that's a pretty hard piece of puzzle. In the end, it kind of makes sense the way you need to climb the tongue. And I think there is a website called the Sierra Help Pages, where they have a screenshot of the whale tongue with 3 mouse clicks you need to do to actually climb it. So it's very easy once you know how, but getting there's a lot of saving and loading.
Yeah.
That's not quite a lot of fun.
But yeah, but I think what I quite like about I think again I'm wondering how much, if it's like adding peril and length to the game. It'd be very annoying if you've got to save.
Don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, the whale scene is so infamous that you actually have a joke about that in Leisure Suit Larry 3 at the end of the game, where they're kind of recording King's Quest 4.
Yeah, that's cause, I think it's doesn't Passionate Paddy end up on the set for King's Quest 4? Yeah. Sorry, spoilers for Larry 3.
Oh, damn it!
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, but yes, that's like one of the more infamous stuff. You mentioned at the start there's a couple of things that stop it from being your favourite. There's a couple of things, like a couple of things you have issues with or things you don't like about it. Have we covered them so far, or is there some stuff that we've not mentioned yet?
Except the stairs or the whale talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is one thing I absolutely hate about King's Quest
Okay.
4, and that's the caves that lead to the swamp where the fruit is.
Mm-hmm.
There are behind a waterfall. There is a cave, a dark cave, and you actually get a lantern to get through that cave. But it's the most useless lantern that I've ever seen. The only thing it does is coloring Rosella. Except that it's still pitch black in there, and you have to kind of very carefully move forward and save a lot, because at one point there is a chasm you cannot see. You can only stumble into it. There is no way to see that chasm in the dark cave, at least none that I have ever realized that you could do. Plus, there is, of course, a cave troll in there who randomly appears or does not appear.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of like random things.
Yeah.
That appears. It's like the I think the zombies that appear. I think they.
Yeah, but they're not that bad, because at that point, if you play it correctly, or if you found the witches, they have the witches have this. Basically, the three witches that only have one eye that need to toss the eye to each other to actually see. And you can grab that eye and leave the cave and come back, and the witches will give you a black scarab, kind of like a pendant or a talisman, something. And that will, protect you from the zombies. So they're not a problem. Also, not mummies or similar undead creatures. So if you have played correctly, those are non-issue.
Yeah, I think there's, and I also think that with the timed aspect, and we briefly mentioned as well, is that you can explore the game in both day and night. Mm. So you have the screens that pretty much have a day version and a night version, and I think, and you can wait 12 hours of the real time for the night to kick in. But I can't remember which bit it is, but there is a puzzle that triggers the night.
I think it's triggered as soon as you are sent to fetch Pandora's box. And I think in the newer SCI version, I think they shortened the time limit. I think they made it like 4 hours or something. But I never played that long, so I cannot. I'm not really sure about that.
But yeah, So I think, it's one of the. I think it might be one of the first games to explore that kind of going the same things through different kind of a day and night cycle, or different kind of designs of the same world and stuff. So in terms of kind of reception and its performance, King's Quest IV sold 100,000 copies in its first 2 weeks. And the combined sales of the King's Quest series by March 1996 had surpassed 3.8 million units. By November 2000, PC Data reported that King's Quest IV sales in the United States alone had reached between 300,000 and 400,000 units. GameSpot staff wrote that the game marked a dramatic increase in the series' commercial success. It was reviewed quite well. It rewarded reviews of 309 out of 400 from Ace, which I've never heard of before. That's a really weird scoring. Ace was a multi-format computer magazine. Wow. 309 out of 400, that's a very weird one. 97 in Amiga Action, 81 in Amiga Computing, 85 from Commodore User, 91% in Computer and Video Games, 85% from CU Amiga, 9 out of 10 from Dator Magazine, 90% from the Games Machine in Italy, 13 out of 15 from Tilt, and 79 from Zap. It was selected as the best adventure game of 1988 by the Software's Publishers Association. I wonder what else was released in 1988.
Zach McCracken, I think.
Ah. I'm going to do a bit of live Googling just to adventure games.
Yeah. Manhunter, perhaps?
In 1988.
Good question. I'm not good with release years. I always think it released 10 years ago.
Okay, so there's a Wikipedia article, 1988 in video games. Cool. Dragon Quest 3, Super Contra, Mario Brothers 2, Mega Man 2, Double Dragon 2, Super Mario Brothers 3, Altered Beasts, Robocop. So yeah, so we've got those kind of the other kind of games. Operation Wolf was the top earning game of 1988 in the UK at least.
Okay, I played that.
I used to have it on the Commodore 64. It was
yeah.
I can't see by genre, but apparently okay. Video games 98 Adventure, Mario Brothers 2, Manhunter New York, Police Quest 2.
Of course, yeah.
King's Quest 4, Leisure Suit Larry Goes Looking. Which one was that one? Oh, it's the first Larry game.
The second.
Was it the second?
Looking for Love.
In several wrong play. Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Because it's Lounge Leaders the first one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so Leisure Suit Larry 2, Zach McCracken, Snatcher Gold Rust, Neuromancer, Time Magic, Deja Vu.
Oh, no.
Famicom Detective Club. Yeah.
I never played that.
Yeah, so at the moment, so Zach McCracken. So that was that before Maniac Mansion?
No, that was after Maniac Mansion.
Okay.
But in 88, that was still the 8-bit version. The 16-bit version that most people know was in 89 or 90, I think.
Okay, so we'd yet to kind of hit the kind of golden era, so we're still in the pre-Monkey Island.
Yes.
But I still find that like to say that's the kind of blockbuster era when we're in the fourth game of the King's Quest things and King's Quest, Police Quest, and Police Quest 2. I'm gonna admit this on podcast. I've never played a Police Quest game.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the series, actually. Well, I love 1, 2, and 3. I didn't like the fourth one.
That's what?
No, that's the fifth. The fourth was Open Season.
Okay.
That wasn't by Jim Walsh. Maybe that's the reason why I didn't like that one.
Okay. So it was up again. So I think it's still safe to say that Sierra was still kind of the king of the pardon the
Quest
pun,
games.
of if you pardon the pun, which is the awful pun, but yeah, so it was doing quite well. In 2009, Atomic named King's Quest 4 one of the 50 games to play before you die. The magazine's Ben Hardwich called it a classic. IGN's Costa Andreas wrote in 2014, "The Perils of Rosella stands the test of time despite its shortcomings, and you can buy it on GOG.com for all above, providing a memorable and at times thrilling adventure, on top of being one of the first games to feature a female protagonist as well as sound card support." So, I think quite a few people mentioned about the for graphics and stuff. A few on AmigaReviews.com, which I've spoke about in the past. Quite a couple of times they talk about the loading of the discs and the flow of games. So, for example, Keith Campbell for CU Amiga saying, "As in all Sierra adventures, the waiting time when pictures, sound, and animation are loading from the disc tends to spoil the flow of play. Although the picture caching in King's Quest 4 does help mitigate this a little." So, I think I remember somewhere actually that they did a re-release in 1989 or of an updated version of the CSI where they tweaked a couple of the graphics. And so they managed to kind of tweak how they did the night. So instead of having a completely different background, they just changed the sky, and apparently that helped save a lot of space on the disc and load times. But I think that was but there's other couple of tweaks like on a web page that like on Cupid's pond. Apparently, there's 2 bushes that have magically vanished from one of the from this version, and a couple of the coloured trees are actually now in shadow rather than in colour, just to try and save memory space. So, but yeah, so it was pretty much well regarded game. Page 6's John Sweeney wrote the game was undoubtedly excellent, but personally he preferred King's Quest 3, which I think I still kind of I think in terms of a nostalgia and kind of the memory of playing it for the first time, I think I still kind of have that kind of attachment to 3 over 4 personally, but I think 4 is still, I think, quite a strong contender. It's all, I think in lists it's always in the higher end of King's Quest game lists. I think again it depends. I think it depends who's writing the quiz and stuff. But yes,
yeah, I love 3.
Yeah, but yeah, I think So I think we're gearing up to the end of our chat on King's Quest 4. We briefly touched on kind of the sequels and where the series goes after this. This is like the end or transitional era, end of an era. But there's as much as this is a kind of leap technologically from 3. Eventually 5 goes into VGA with voice acting and point and click stuff. And 5 feels like the working get things out, and then you get to 6, and 6 is, I think, a masterpiece. Masterpiece. Then we get to 7, which I don't have that much memory of, but I know I wasn't a fan of it, as you said. I think particularly because of like some of the story decisions and everything. But I think this is quite a strong entry in King's Quest, in the King's Quest series. Do you have any last things that we not mentioned that you want to bring up, or?
Well, just that, I mean, I love the game. As I told you, I like the contrast between, it's a very dreary game at times, a very sad one, has a lot of sadness in it, a lot of, well, I wouldn't say horror elements, but at least a little bit creepy, like classic episodes of Doctor Who creepy, where you get goosebumps, but not horror. And it's fantastic at it. It does have its problems, and undeniably, but at least for me personally, I can look past these problems and enjoy the game as it is. And if anyone wants to play it nowadays, you mentioned it, there is a sort of remaster called King's Quest 4 Retold, which replaces the parser input, which I love personally, but it replaces it with the icons of later Sierra games, and it also gets rid of a couple of possible dead ends, and it even makes the caves bearable. So if you want a little bit a softer version of King's Quest 4, but still using the original MT32 soundtracks, still the original EGA dithered graphics, they added the Amiga sound effects into it. So if you want to play King's Quest 4, perhaps that might be the better version for you. But I invite everyone try the original. I think it's fantastic.
I'm just currently looking on the AGDI site. For anyone who doesn't know, they're the ones that kind of did fan remakes of King's Quest 1, King's Quest 2, and King's Quest 3. To the point where I think their version of King's Quest 3 is amazing, and what they do with what they do with the story in King's Quest 2 is brilliant. They kind of flesh that out and stuff. I'm kind of saddened that they never got around to doing a version of 4. I mean, have you played the AGDI versions of?
Yeah, sure. I have played 1, 2, and 3, and of the third one, there is another remake from what was their name? There's a second one, which is a little bit different, but also very well done.
Yeah. I'm just wondering what do you think they could if they were to suddenly do 4? How would you think they would have approached 4 then? If they kept the same style as they did with the first 3?
I think they would tie a lot to that plot they were going on with 2 and 3, with the with a cult or what?
Is it the Black Circle? The Black Circle or something?
Black Circle.
I think what they did, because I think it was number 5 that kind of revealed that Manaman was part of and like Mordak was it? Like Mordak was part, and I think there was embedding Mordak into those as well. So I think they probably would have incorporated the lot into that. I think. Yeah, but
and they would probably incorporate Hagatha from King's Quest 2 in some way with Lolot.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine. I think that would have been very, very interesting.
Yeah. It's a shame they haven't done it. I'd love to see that. Because I'm saying because the work on the first 3 is amazing. So Pat. So I think this is So we definitely reached the end of our conversation. So if people want to find you online, where can they find you?
If you're speaking English, maybe you want to look at our little podcast, Passion of the Geeks, where I podcast every now and then with my friend Greg. We have finished our first season and we're now planning a second one. So I occasionally talk about adventure games as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and you're on Twitter and any other socials?
And on Twitter, yes.
Yeah. Where can they find you on Twitter, or if we want to follow you?
It's at Pat9496. The original Pat.
Version 1.0.
Version 1.0. Yeah. No, I would be great if someone wants to talk a little bit about adventures and stuff.
Well, yeah, you've got 700 of them, so you've got plenty to talk about. But yeah, I didn't even realise there was 700 of them in general. And people say the genre is dead. Yeah.
No, it's
isn't. Definitely not. Definitely not.
No, it isn't. In fact, in the last couple of years, there were such great adventure releases. It's very much alive. It's just no longer a AAA genre.
Yeah. So actually, while I'm talking about Mondays, what have you been playing recently?
Oh, actually, I was playing a lot of old stuff because writing a couple of things about that. So a lot of Sierra Space Quest series. I was playing the Larry series because that was something I was working on there. But yeah, I played, the last couple of games that came, like Blood Nova and stuff. So especially October, November were some really great releases.
Yeah, definitely was. So feel free to follow Pat online and have a chat with him with Avenger Games. As you can tell, he's very passionate, very very enthusiastic and stuff, and it's been a lot of fun. If you want to follow Ask Us About Loom on the socials, we're on Instagram and Twitter under Ask Us About Loom. If you ever want to add it, if you want any comments about the games that we've spoken about, feel free to email askusaboutlloom@gmail.com. Any comment? I hope one day I hope to have like a mailbag episode. So if anyone has any comments of what we've spoken about so far and any of the episodes, feel free to email me and tell me that I'm completely right and not wrong at all. Feel free to do that. And as always as well, if anyone's into music, I have my music podcast, which is Pick a Disc, which you can find on all your podcast apps of choice if you want to listen to that. And that is it. I just want to say thank you once again to Pat for coming on to Ask Us About Loom.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Colin.
I'm Ian.
And I'm Tracy.
And we dig music.
Just not always the same music.
Each episode, we pick our 10 favourite songs from a specific year, rate them, and then battle it out over a top 30 countdown.
Colin's pretty enthusiastic about most stuff, Ian less so.
And Tracy definitely owns a thesaurus. And one of us will regularly be told to fuck off.
So join us each month to hear what we dig and what we don't. Listen to We Dig Music wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on wedigpodcast.com, or we're on the We Made This Podcast Network, which you can find at wemadethisnetwork.com.